this talk coincides with the show behind me, which continues until the 21st. And we're going to structure the talk today. First, Felipe and Clay will talk about these works more generally, and then we will do a quick tour to get to the show. And at any point, there is a Q&A function at the bottom right. So if you have questions, you can add them throughout the talk, and then there will be a Q&A, dedicated Q&A at the end of this. And yeah, so oops. If we will start with Felipe.
Can you hear me?
You should have control now over the.
Hello. Well, thank you, Nicholas, for organizing this this show exhibition, of course, and this talk with Clay. I'm very curious to see it. Luckily, I'm going to be able to see it next week, I think, in person. And I would like to start with an introduction, hopefully not too long. Basically, well, to introduce myself to people who don't know me, I'm from Chile originally, but I have a pretty nomadic life. I grew up in London actually when I was a kid until I was 9. Born in Chile, then grew up in London, and then I moved back to Chile where I studied, finished school and art school, and then I moved to New York, and now I'm in Belgium. Well, all over the place. But basically, I think this is I just want to mention it because I think this nomadic life, and this is also something that I've been sort of realizing recently in the last years, that it influences. It had influenced how I've been able, or sort of interested in doing projects in different places and connecting with different people and different cultures and different languages. That's one sort of brief introduction. Then the other one is that I've always been interested in geometric abstraction, in the history of modernism, and what we're viewing now is it's a installation that I did for a group exhibition some years ago in Italy, where you could basically interact with the piece. You know, the piece was meant to be moved by the public, so anybody could just grab these curtains, I call them curtains, and sort of make your own arrangement of them, play with the arrangements and the spatial disposition. Until this point, I was basically working in a very sort of concentrated way where I will make sketches and I will choose colors, and then I will find fabrics that were similar to these colors, you know, from the collage or the sketch that I made, and then I will produce them. Normally, I will produce them with help. In that time, I was working with a seamstress in Chile that I met, and also with my former partner, who she's also an artist, Johanna Unzueta, and she will help me also with sort of basic textile knowledge of sewing and stitching. And slowly I started learning some of these techniques. And at one point I also decided to incorporate more people to sort of expand, like why only work with a couple of people when there's many people that have knowledge and experience of textiles. And there's all this sort of also different techniques and materials that you know, if you go to Brazil or if you go to Mexico, generally Latin America, the handcraft and traditional sort of making, you know, is very present. And I think this is also related to the influence of indigenous cultures that we still have, and which are very strong in places like I mentioned, like in Mexico, Peru, or Bolivia, even the north of Chile and the south of Chile. There's a strong influence of indigenous cultures and their textile sort of traditions, but also out of necessity, and I think because of living in a more precarious sort of societies, people also tend to fix their clothes and, you know, mend their clothes, and so it's very common that you know someone who has sort of textile knowledge. Sorry, I was going to go back to this photo. This is a project that I did in Brazil for the Bienal de Sao Paulo 2016. And here I collaborated with two teams, two sort of studios. With one studio, we did fabric on fabric, and the other studio was embroidery. And what was interesting here is that I also sort of, before this project even, but I want to mention this one, I opened up sort of the process of production. So I will, for example, not any longer decide the colors of the curtains. I will pick different fabrics, and then I will ask the producers, in this case, these two different teams, to help me, decide color combinations. So the project also started opening in terms of techniques that I was started to use, and also, basic decisions like color combinations. Here again, the works are meant to be also interactive. In this case, the lower level, people were also invited to move them, to change the dispositions. Uh, each curtain was hung on an independent cable, so they could overlap. This is a detail of the embroidery, which the work has this sort of double sort of situation where it has a far away sort of impact or vision, and then when you get close, you start seeing all these subtle differences of the texture of the fabric, different stitches. And for me, this is very important because it holds the hand of the people that work with me producing these works, and also their decisions. For example, here on the left, we have this stitch is called lluvia in Portuguese, which means rain in English. And it was also a suggestion by one of the embroiderers. He said, "Oh, why don't we, instead of filling this whole space that will take, maybe too long," she proposed to use this stitch called lluvia. So also this idea of um, leaving space and an opening space for people to also propose, solutions and yeah. This is another project which I did for the Paris Museum in Miami, and by a suggestion of the curator who I worked with at that time, who's Jennifer Ignacio. She proposed to work with the Mikosuki community, which is a Native American tribe from South Florida, and who have a very strong tradition of patchwork. Which on the left, you can see how patchworks integrated in sort of contemporary design of, this was actually a fashion show that I visited while I was doing research, because you have the traditional use of patchwork and then the contemporary use of patchwork, where they also combine, these traditional designs with, shiny fabrics, or even, for example, they will, in a t-shirt with Nickelodeon or Disney figures, like they will, this synchronicity of sort of culture, from the very traditional to very pop and very contemporary. In the center of this slide, we have Cadilla, who's the artisan I work with, and together we also sort of decided the color palette of each curtain. On the right also, there's a detail of the patchwork before it's sewn to the fabric. And what's interesting about this patchwork is that each one is an abstraction of an element of nature. So in this case, on the right, this brown and gray design that you see is called lightning, sorry. So each curtain was named after the patchwork design. So there's one was called frog, another one was called turtle, snake skin, fire, and so on. So it's in this project also, what was important for me was also to sort of focus or put some kind of attention to different kinds of different histories of abstraction, because we are very into this Western canon of geometric abstraction, of modernism, and there's this, of course, this belief, and this is also how I studied in art school, that we studied Bauhaus, the Russian constructivists, the Stil, Mondrian, all this history, and then how these movements basically were translated and influenced the American sort of art history, the North American art history, and then also how this also sort of also migrated to the south of the continent. But we also normally avoid all other histories of abstraction. And for me, this was an important gesture to incorporate these other histories of abstraction, where they also abstracting elements of nature and the surroundings, but in a very different way. Here again, the curtains are interactive. Some of them were hanging on cables like before, like we saw before. People were also invited to or allowed to move them with gloves. There was a little box with gloves that people, wear. And then this is a detail of one of the patchworks, the lightning one. And this is a video that I guess, can you play it, Nicholas, or I have to play
I
it?
should be able to.
No, it's not working.
Voila. Let me just.
It says watching the YouTube. It's strange because the other day it was working when we did the test.
Exactly.
Yeah, now it's working, no? Yeah. So just to round up this portrait with the curtains, is that the idea is to create a piece that is open in many levels or as horizontal as possible in all its stages. So from the production or from the conception even, for example, the creator proposed to work with Mikosuke. It was an idea that I had. Then the production of the project, how I collaborate with the producers to decide color schemes or color combinations. Then how it's installed in space, creating this temporal and ephemeral architecture that people can interact with and physically touch. So also to break this barrier between art and people, that you can actually touch it and feel it and move it. And for me, this is very important because it also brings another experience with the artwork, and that is less intellectual or less cerebral, and it's more physical. And this basically allows you to understand the piece in a different way when you're touching it, when you're moving it. You experience it in a different way, or if you walk around it, or if it creates a space for certain things to happen. Then again, trying to expand how this project can interact with more and more people. On the one hand, I have this case where I collaborate with a specific artisan or artists who work with textiles. But what happens, I was also interested in creating another way of working with people, and then also with another curator for a project that happened in 2018, I believe, in Sweden, in Rodasten in Gothenburg. She proposed to do a workshop because also some places, not every place or every city or every region has a rich textile history. Sometimes it's been erased, or sometimes it doesn't exist simply because of economics, because of history. So in Sweden, we were not able to find this sort of like a local technique, or at least people who wanted to work with me. So we decided to do an open call and make a workshop where people will come and learn to embroider and learn to embroider, or if maybe they know how to embroider, but they could come and we create a space for people to gather and to work together. And the images we're looking at now, it's a workshop that I did in Chile in 2022 that ran for a whole month, a little over a month, I think about 5 weeks almost. And for every day, Monday to Friday, for like 3 or 4 hours, I will work in this space, which was kind of a residency that I did. And people will come and we will work together and embroider these pieces, which there's a detail there. And now on the right, you see a detail. It's a very complex embroidery. So we also had 2 levels of sort of teaching and working. Also, on the one hand, the simple chain stitch I could teach, and I could sort of direct. I could feel comfortable directing a workshop like this. But for this stitch that is very complicated, it's called smock. Then I had a sort of an assistant to help, the same person that I mentioned before, that I've been working with from the beginning, who's Miriam in Chile, in Santiago. And she was the main teacher or sort of leader of this part of the workshop. So we have 2 levels of difficulty. So one was open to everybody, and this other one was more directed to people who already had experience embroidering. And this is how they looked in space. It's an exhibition in Chile in a museum called MAVI, Museo de Artes Visuales, 2022. And yeah, and that's my introduction, and we can talk later more in detail. So now, Clay, please.
We're handing it back over to Clay. Unlike Felipe, who has a practice that kind of has co-authorship to some extent, you have a far more controlled practice.
Yeah, I think Felipe has forced me to think about collaboration in my work, and the collaboration basically is I live in, well, I'm a expatriated American living in Sweden for 38 years now. So I became a Swedish citizen sometime in the early 90s, and I've lived here since then. And it's funny, Sweden is a very DIY country, and the other reference to DIY is that I grew up with a DIY father in the United States. So he was a engineer, and any application, any craft, he would do himself. And I appreciated that, admired it, but also I decided early on that I would try to avoid that. I would try to. I don't believe in learning all kinds of skills, and because I want to stick with I want to stick with the focus on the core issue at hand. And I find I am a technician myself, but I find technique quite distracting sometimes. And so when it comes to a photography project, for instance, it was very important for me when I decided to use photography as the thing, the artwork. It was automatic for me to find a photographer and not learn how to use a camera in that way. And so I started working with Niels Bergendahl as my photographer. But the collaboration sort of stays there. I'm sort of very careful to make sure these professionals get paid their going rate. And but I must say that even though I'm paying them their going rate to help me with different projects, not only photographers, but in this case, it becomes a collaboration. It's a generous thing, and it becomes a collaboration by default, and I enjoy that. I enjoy that very much. But yeah, so enough about collaboration. So in 1999, I decided, yeah. So when I was in art school, photography was sort of a way to make a notebook for the artist. He would take pictures of things that you felt that influenced you and that you felt were interesting, and that would be sort of a visual notebook. And the step from supplemental photography, I call it, to using photography as the artwork was a big step for me. I knew I had to do it, but I was very skeptical. I'm still skeptical about the use of photography in my work, and self-critical, and I'm critical to the use of certain uses of photography in contemporary art altogether. I won't get into that, but I have a critical eye on that aspect of contemporary art. But I had a problem that I needed to solve, and photography was the way to solve it. And that was to capture a road in a non-perspective way. So a road is almost always experienced in perspective. And I had been dealing a lot with flatness in my works before this. I was basically, in a nutshell, I'll just say that I was making paintings without using paint, and making sculptural pieces that were basically a collection of different planes, I thought, surfaces, or making sculptures that making things that implied sculpture. And then I ended up making paintings that implied sculpture, and so on, using non-art painting materials and non-sculpture materials, more materials out of the building world. And so when I started contemplating seriously this road situation, I felt that in the long run, the only way to approach it was to capture the road straight from above. This was, I believe it was before drones were used to take photography, at least in my world, as far as I knew. So we started by using a Sinar 8x10 film camera in a crane, as you see in these shots here, and filming and taking shots of the total width of the road from above and capturing it. Really, this is a sculptural idea. What I really wanted to do, something I experienced by watching drawbridges rise up, and you see this huge square piece of asphalt road raised up vertically. It's a beautiful thing, but I didn't find the idea of recreating that as an artwork very attractive. You know, so I decided to use photography. And at first we used that Sinar camera, and then the camera kept collapsing because of the friction locks on it. So we ended up building a camera, which I don't think we have a picture of.
Coming up, yeah.
Yeah, actually, oddly, the first picture is of the camera that we built. And we built that camera because a bellows camera would collapse when using it vertically. So.
And here,
And this is Nils Bergendahl, who this was our first project together. And here are the pieces hanging at Lunds Konsthall, I think, as a group, as a series. I'm still very happy with these pieces. They did this concrete thing I wanted them to do. They became, for me, sculptural in a sense, or about sculpture. And these pieces led me out of, I really am a very nervous, itchy artist, and I really don't like to stay in one place way too long. And so this leap into photography was really opened some doors for me. Not necessarily into photography, but away from where I was anyway.
oops. And here we have a shot of your studio where
Yeah.
both photography and painting and
It's
objects that combine both.
and dogs, yeah. It's a comedy. It's a sort of self-critical photo of me doing too many things at once, which is more or less my problem. Does this go on to some shots from?
Yeah, we will revisit the Gulf Coast labs in a minute when we.
Okay, well then it was interesting to begin with my first photography project. Nice.
I should just mention that you with the road series, as these pieces are called, you were photographing streets in Sweden that were patched up after the winter. So
Yeah.
These patchworks come out of the necessity to fill holes in the road, really.
It's because of the farmers.
Yeah.
The farmers drive their heavy trucks and tractors on the roads, and they take quite a beating. So it is sort of site specific in a way to this part of the world, these patches.
Great. if we then go to the show here, which grew out of an idea that Daniela and I came across this catalog of a show that both of you were in the early 2000s in New York. And Felipe, you work with my brother's gallery in Switzerland, and that's how we became aware of your work. And we thought it was quite interesting to show these two series of works next to each other that are both quite distinct in your practices and both involve a different way of collaborating with a photographer or with the local artisans. And in this case, the curtains that we've loaned for the exhibitions are all part of a series that you made during a residency that we will look at in a minute. And we installed the pieces in the both as a combination where there are pieces hanging freely that move with the space, and on the wall where they become almost like take on a different pictorial space rather than a sculptural space. That works very nicely with these almost sculpture photographs of the Gulf Coast slabs by Clay. And if we go through the installation, you also get a feel for the scale of the pieces in the show.
Yes, looking great.
Felipe, I was mentioning that these were all made in one place in Nicaragua a couple of years ago.
Yes. Well, like I mentioned before, I sort of do research on the textile history of the place where I'm invited to do a project, and this project was in Solentiname, which is an archipelago of islands in the Great Lake of Nicaragua, and it has a very interesting history. And because, well, first of all, I couldn't find, and this is also something that happened to me before in other places in Central America, and I think maybe it's because of the weather, the heat, it's the Caribbean, so textiles are not very important, like basically, like in the practical terms. People don't wear much clothes. That honestly, like, you wear shorts and a little t-shirt, you're fine, and sandals. Like, you don't need much covering. And on top of that, because of economies, two different political histories, there's not a strong textile tradition. But I did find this beautiful painting tradition, and in this place called Solentiname, which it all started with. On the image of the left, we have here Ernesto Cardenal, he was a priest and a poet and a sculptor and a leftist politician. He was influenced by the theology of liberation, which is a branch of Christianity that it's very aware of social issues, basically. And he fell in love with this place, and he decided to live there and to establish sort of a base there. And he will invite artists and poets and writers to come to this island called Isla Mancarron, where he lived, and basically get the farmers and the fishermen and the people who lived in this area to get to know them and interact. And out of this interaction, there's a whole school of painting that came out. I don't like to call it this way, but they call it primitive or brute painting. It's called the School of Solentiname, painting of Solentiname. And then there's also this sort of sculptural craft that is influenced by his own sculptures. Like on the left, we have a sculpture that he created, and on the right, there's an example of all of this craft that they still produce today, of fishes, of different animals, of turtles, of crocodiles, of snakes, of different animals, and the common sort of, it's like a formal detail that I discovered that all of them shared was this sort of gradation of color. So there's this, they all have this beautiful gradations of color as a background, and then they will paint on top of this gradation of color. So I decided to use that aspect as like a pictorial aspect to dye fabric, and again, going back to, if I don't find a textile tradition, maybe I find another tradition. In this case was this painting. So I decided to do this, to dye myself, um, um, with Fabiola, who came and helped me, my partner. And we did the dyeing, just the two of us together for a few days. We dyed all this fabric, and then we worked with a family who is, basically they produce these sculptures, and it's very gender divided. The men will carve the wood. It's a very light wood. They will carve it. Next to this little terrace, there was another sort of studio where the men were carving, and then you have the women who paint. So we would work with a family of painters, and this is part of the residency that is organized by Marcos Agudelo, who's an architect and artist, and he's been doing these residencies, or organizes residencies, for at least, I think, something like 8-10 years now. But sadly, because of the political situation in Nicaragua now, it's very hard to make anything happen. So this I was lucky that there was sort of a window where he got funding, and the political situation was a little bit less complicated. So we were able to go. But he's been interacting and sort of dialoguing with families and this community for many years, because also this is also an important aspect. As a child, he visited this island, this area, with his father, who was a friend of Ernesto Cardenal. So it's not like, I just want to explain that it's not something that we go and impose ourselves. It's something that's been going on for many years, and it's basically he's trying to continue this tradition of Ernesto Cardenal of bringing artists to this place, to interact and to create something together, to work together with the families who live there, whoever is interested too. It's not, maybe there's people who are not interested, but I think most of them are genuinely interested, because they have this tradition of painting and of this sort of animal craft, very, and for them it's very important, because it created also sort of a third economy. They don't depend only on fishing or farming. They can also sell their products, which sadly also has been affected because of the political situation. Of course, there's less tourism. So for me, it was important to sort of rescue this vibrance of colors, the gradation of color, and we decided to just paint white lines to sort of, just to create sort of two layers, not complicate it more with more color. The color is the background, and then we have the drawings painted in white. And then the other step, because this residency also, it wasn't related to an exhibition or anything. The idea was just to produce work and to interact with local communities, with the local community. So instead of doing an exhibition, I proposed to take photos of the pieces in different sites, of interest in this island, in this archipelago. So I have a few examples, like one on the boat, which is, you have, this is like, like having a car in Dallas, or having a car in every major city, in Santiago, in Chile. Like, you need a car. In this place, of course, you need a boat to transport yourself. Then this is a shot. I did two shots, one from the outside and one from inside, and this is the little church that was built by Ernesto Cardenal with the collaboration of the community. For example, the drawings on the wall, and this is a restoration actually that was made by Marcos Agudelo, because I think there was some kind of hurricane or big storm that damaged the building. So Marcos, as an architect, he raised money and was able to restore the building. And those drawings are actually drawings that they invited children to make when it was originally made, and they later transferred the drawings into the wall. And it's a beautiful, it's one, I'm not religious, I'm atheist, but I have to say this is one of the most beautiful chapels I've seen ever. And it's very simple, very humble. The floor is mud floor. It's not concrete or anything. It's just mud floor. And then there's one more image here of one of the curtains in this like small banana plantation it's right there. And just to round up, it was a very sort of touching experience. I think we were there only for 10 days, but it was 10 days of like work, and to getting to know the people, getting to know the landscape, the geography, getting also eaten alive by insects. Like literally, we will have like 60 bites. Me and my partner, like we counted one day, and we have from the knee down like 50 bites of different insects. Like the place is so rich with life, and it's very humid. Even if it doesn't rain, you wake up in the morning, everything is wet, and there's life crawling everywhere. And I found it very beautiful that people in this place have a relationship with art that is it's not what we expect. It's not what we or maybe we expect it, but I didn't expect it to be so present in their daily life or so important for them, and that also makes them very open to collaborate with artists, to get to know artists, and interact and create sort of something or work on something together. That was the sort of what I took, or sort of what touched me the most.
Great. Quite a shift to Clay's Gulf Coast Labs. Everything started off with this image in Time magazine, didn't it?
I believe it was Time. Yeah, it was a. I was watching the turn of events with the Katrina storm, just like everybody else on the news media, and I'm quite fascinated by crazy weather and its effects, and so I was watching the news, and I was watching things unfold in New Orleans. Of course, it was the main news story, rightly so, was about the plight of the people living in the Ninth Ward and other low-lying parts of Louisiana. And at the same time, I saw this photograph, and I realized, I did a little bit of research, I realized that it was not at all New Orleans, Louisiana, but it was the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. And I was we don't have any reference to my earlier works here, but when I looked at this photograph, I was reminded of my work, quite frankly. And I also realized this is just one place, and the birth of this storm was so radically wide that I quite pragmatically realized that basically a whole stretch of the Gulf Coast looked more or less like this. And I was also drawn to, I started reading about this area and what was going on here, and I realized that in contrast to what was happening in New Orleans, which was the main news coverage, this was more of a middle class tragedy, it seemed. Like these were people who were pensioners, or for one reason or another decided to settle in these housing areas right on the beach along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, basically. And you could see remnants of their lives already looking at this photograph. Among other things, you could see that there's a car in the swimming pool there. And so you get sort of the scale of what was going on. And having done this project with Niels Bayendal before, photographing roads, I just have to throw in here that I had made paintings for some time that resembled walls where things had been taken off of the walls, and the traces of those things were left on the walls. And that was my painting for some time. And it was quite a few years after I had stopped making those paintings, I saw this and I realized that there was this whole language in this landscape that was very much akin to what I had been doing and what still interested me. And once again, maybe not apologetically, but I mean, I became very pragmatic and realized that I could go back to using the camera and get a lot of material out of this. But once again, I was sort of interested in the social aspect of this already before I went there to scout for the project, because it was, like I said, it was something that fell upon people that weren't, how should I put it? How would you put it, Nicholas?
Well, you ended up photographing a lot in former kind of holiday village, and a lot of these people were, of course, had government insurance. So there's the interest was more to kind of capture this moment, and this is part of the reason why we chose this picture. This is taken a year after the hurricane, when you went there to take the series, and we can already see people rebuilding. So
exactly,
before complete renewal.
The whole issue of insurance, by the way, I'm going to cut to the chase soon, but the whole issue of insurance was pretty fascinating for me, because these people had insurance policies that insured their houses that were literally, meters from the beach in one of the most dangerous storm areas in the world, And of course, their insurance got challenged after this. So anyway, so the story goes that I went there to scout. I realized what I wanted to do. Like you, I think a lot of artists would agree with me that once you get an idea that really etches itself into your practice, it basically, for me anyway, everything materializes all at once. I know how I'm going to do it. I know, it sort of, things sort of cascade in terms of the implementation of your idea. And that's the way I work anyway. And so within a couple of days of considering doing this, I realized what I needed to do, among other things, to go to the Gulf Coast and scout, because I realized it was a very sensitive situation with a lot of people that had lost everything, obviously. And so I did exactly that. I flew to, I went to Mississippi, and what I did is I scouted for sites, and I also met all the local fire rescue, different people that were involved in the aftermath of the storm, the sheriff's offices, all of that, in order to make sure that I was welcome at all, and that that it was okay for me to be running around taking photos of people's lost houses. I mean, it's quite sensitive. It seemed sensitive to me at the time. And right already at when I scouted, I was met by really, as soon as I explained what I wanted to do, not necessarily why, but what I wanted to do, people were really generous and willing to help. And I wasn't shocked by that, but it really helped me relax, because I felt like I was sort of, messing with people's tragedies here. It turned out that, okay, and then later on, when we went there, it was quite a project. We we organized the rental of a couple of cranes. We flew, Nils and myself to Mississippi with our cameras, a couple of cameras, and we proceeded to photograph these slabs along an entire stretch, all the way towards, from Gulfport, Mississippi, all the way towards Louisiana state line. You can see from these aerial snapshots that there was just an enormous amount of material. And this was a year after, so what we were photographing wasn't only the aftermath of a storm, not nearly that. What it was the aftermath of a storm, and it was the aftermath of the cleanup. And in some cases, signs that of people, you know, reestablishing themselves in some cases. And upon returning and doing our project, we got to meet some of the people that own these properties. Like I said, we checked with the sheriff's offices and the rescue office to make sure this was okay. But in the long term, we were showing up with a truck and hanging over someone's house. And every once in a while, the people who owned these houses would show up and we would have conversations with them. And that's, I was thinking of collaboration in terms of this. And that actually is a large field of collaboration, was actually meeting these people, getting their blessings to photograph their homes that they had lost. And it's quite touching. And also, my collaboration with Nils took on a dimension, because which also happened when I was shooting shots in the barrios of Valencia, and that is that Nils allowed me to be the pragmatist that I am and concentrate on the technical, you know, really getting what I came to get. Where Nils was by my side, and he was the technician, of course, but he's also a very empathetic person, and was able to be sort of the empathetic person in these situations and talk to people. He even eventually did a short film with a couple of people. Actually, the couple who owned 113 Hayden, which is this piece is very special because it's two adjacent slabs owned by a father and his wife and the son and his family. They had bought houses next door to each other on this street in outside of Gulfport, and Nils we managed to meet the older man and his wife, and he did a short documentary, which I don't even think you've seen, Nicholas. No. Yeah. So
what's funny about this is, or interesting about this, is that these buildings were not. You told me that they were not built at the same time. They were built a couple of years apart. And
yeah.
Some decided to build almost the identical house to his parents next door.
They're almost identical. And then, of course, the thing that I found fascinating for my own work, for my practice, was that it took me back to my trace paintings, but in a completely different way. I've always resented having to pick colors in my paintings. I like when colors show up, you know. So often in my paintings, I would find a situation. I'd say, well, that's a cool turquoise color. I'll use that in the painting. And it became legitimate because I'd seen it somewhere. But to pick colors entirely off the top of my head is just a horrid thought. And in this situation, I realized that what I was looking at were people's choices of tiles, you know. Like they went out and, you know, when they built their home, they decided that they were going to have that tile in their home. And that's just fantastic for me it's such a gift to be given in a sense. I love this shot. Yeah, all these homes were they were built not too long ago, like maybe in the 80s, perhaps.
Hmm.
And they were built the way we built in the 80s and continue to build.
And
I mean, these houses don't stand a chance with a storm like that, obviously.
So here we have you in this next to the cherry picker that you.
Yeah, I look way too serious. We were actually having a great time, but we look a bit macho here. But yeah, that's what we look like when we're working. It was, of course, quite hot there. Yeah, I don't know what else we have for images.
Unfortunately, I think that's it in terms of images, but this is possibly also a good time to point out that there is a book that documents the entire series, and we've just republished it. So if you go on our website, there is in journal, there is a short text about this series, and the entire catalog is available there, so you can really delve into it a bit more. So I think perhaps this is a good time to open this up for a Q&A. Yeah. So at the bottom right, you should see. I hope you can send questions if you have any.
I have one if nobody has one. For Clay.
Go ahead.
No, sorry if I missed the date, but this series that we're looking at now, what year was this done?
So we went there in 2006, and I produced the pieces in 2007.
Yeah, no, because just thinking that now with climate change and global warming, like this is going to be more frequent and more frequent. It's already more, So like, if you have any, not necessarily thoughts, but if you have thought of that. Like,
I've thought of it, but this is a dilemma I have as a visual artist. Is that what's not a dilemma? I've decided a long time ago how to handle it, and that is that I did this, and I did it for me at the right time, and it became a very pivotal work for me, body of work. But I don't want to be the individual that chases after storms and continues to do this. I have no reason to do that. I've done it already. Mm-hmm. It's more important how this has influenced my art making and my language. But the practice of running around with a crane taking shots of destruction from storms is that's, to me, it seems pretty crass. I'm really not interested in that.
Maybe instead, maybe I phrased it in the wrong way. I was just trying to say that, like, in the context of today, this also has a very strong reading. Like it's very different to see it. I mean, it's of course it's strong then in that time, but now that just thinking that this is happening more and more, it just makes it more, present. And I'm not trying to say that it will ask if you're going to do it again. It's just like it's a thought that I have, that it's it's like, wow, this is what, 20 years ago almost.
Yeah, the significance of this art is more, this work is more up to someone else to determine. But I mean, obviously what's happening today and what we're aware of that's happening today is, I mean, mega. But once again, I mean, now you can see what I mean. I can't possibly keep up with what's going on in the aesthetics of it. What I can say, though, is that that I didn't mention before, is that ultimately, and once again, this becomes sort of a pragmatism. I am these works for me are an act of aesthetics. I am extremely interested in the aesthetics of these works, and they are aesthetic works for me. And then there's the underlying context, of course. But if they weren't beautiful, to me, I wouldn't make them. It's the bottom line.
I think there's also built into the fact that you're photographing from the top, there is a certain degree of abstraction that's built into the pieces. And of course, this is of a particular place, but it could also be anywhere, really. I mean, it's not it's almost universal in that sense.
They're specific if you get into the anthropological aspect of the pieces. I know that they're from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. I know that this was a situation that was where people most inhabited by middle class people somehow, a lot of retirees, and so that anthropological aspect for me is interesting. The choices people made for what tiles and what things are interesting for me. So for me, this couldn't have been anywhere, but I get your point.
Yeah. So I'm just going to see if we can get the
It's the chat mechanism on the bottom there. If people can write in.
Yeah, somebody raised his hand.
They seem to have a problem.
Okay, I just opened the queue.
So, okay. So here we have a question. Seems to be working now. So we have a question from Sarah Chilvers. Both artists' works here looks at traces of people and marks made by them, but not the artist's own marks. Okay, so how conscious are you about making? I mean, how much control do you really have about in the process? I mean,
the only control I exercised, if I understand the question correctly, if it was a question, it was that we didn't move or alter anything at all. In two cases, two shots of the entire series, we removed in Photoshop the shadow of the crane.
mm-hmm.
But we didn't remove objects or anything. So everything that's scattered about, if that's the case, was we had sort of a religious, we didn't want to move anything. My artist's hand and eye have to do with the cropping. Yeah, the decision to make them just the entire slab and nothing more or less.
So in this series, you photograph from the top down, like you did in the road series, but
yeah,
behind you we see a section from a piece from the Valencia series, which is between these two, where you're photographing walls flat on.
Right. They were made in 2003 and 2005.
And how do they relate to this? I mean, where did this conscious decision come into play there? The choosing of the cropping and
once again, okay, for the to try to legitimize these pieces, I would say that it's the same way of working. I'm taking a whole wall. So these pieces from Valencia are an entire wall of a room. In some cases, the entire side of a house, but more rarely. But usually they're a room. There's a wall in a room. Once again, to sort of depict a one singular situation. If one were in that room and it was still a house, you would, experience that wall in particular.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think that was a very good answer.
But you contained it, so you're making a conscious decision to contain within the section that you decide to print.
There's a connection. I find that everything, more and more as I go on, I find that everything is connected to sculpture in the long run. And I feel that in both the Valencia and this situation and with the roads, I needed to capture something, and I didn't see the point in making sculpture, but I enjoy implying sculpture in this way.
And you're working with a found object in that sense as well.
Yeah, it's just a way to collect and organize and categorize real situations, but they're also ideas. I can't really explain the sculptural thing, but it's a very strong idea for me right now.
Felipe, and for you, the kind of idea of really kind of almost surrendering some of your process to artisans. How conscious are you? How much do you prescribe in your pieces?
It's a very important part of my practice and has been a very important part. I don't have a singular assistant right now. I haven't for a while. Mm-hmm. But when I do have people assisting me, I'm very happy to use their talents, and I have no problem with their talents influencing my work. So when I'm working with Nils, there is a collaboration, and I learn a lot about photographic seeing, and obviously Nils' ability to use large format cameras and work with them has influenced the way I see and the way I decide to capture things from project to project to project.
And for you, Felipe?
I just want to mention that I had another assistant for a great many years. I think, well, first I had an assistant for 12 years who was a furniture carpenter. And during that period, I made all of my kitchen sculptures, among other, very sort of carpentered pieces. And then when I was working with, his name was Lasse Clausen. And then when I was working with Cy Wilmer, he was a plastics expert, and we started making pieces out of plastics and making pieces using silk screening because he was a silk screener. So, I mean, that's just wonderful to bump into people that know how to do things. It's,
Felipe.
Yes. Well, in my case, of course, like each project I see them as site specific in all senses, in all the sort of steps of the project. Maybe the only and the initial sort of the starting point of each project is drawing, and that's what I do in my table here in my studio. I work with notebooks, like right now I'm working on a new series of drawings, and this is the part, and this is what sort of unites, and it's sort of like the common thread or the common glue of everything, of all the different projects. Like there's always an abstract drawing that is made in sort of based on a grid, based on rules that I make up for myself, and these drawings, the way I see them is that they become this sort of language, this code that is universal. And this is also how abstraction has been also seen in history, or within the arts, or within the other histories of abstraction that I was mentioning before. There's always this sort of intention to communicate something, and that could be something just purely formal, or it could be more spiritual, or it could be more decorative. So this language that I'm working with, this sort of visual codes or drawings or designs that you can call it different ways. I'm not very strict with that in that sense. This is sort of what, and not only that specific kind of code or language or drawings, but it's also this idea of infinity, like that, like how many drawings I can make, based on this idea of working on the grid. I'm sort of fascinated by this, that there's an infinite possibilities. I might, hopefully I've been making a drawing before I die, like this idea of producing these signs that anybody can read or anybody could interpret it. And then when I collaborate with people, and this is also something beautiful that you mentioned, Clay, before, that you were fascinated by the selection of tiles of somebody in their home, and that's also, it's a personal choice, but it's also related to an era, to the 80s, to a style, which is also related to economics. Like that Home Depot is important or is working with this material because there's all these other reasons why that material is there and why that specific tile is there. But then somebody comes and chooses that tile. And I have a similar experience working with different people, different artisans, because they will choose also colors based on their own personal choices. But we're also working on fabric that is available for specific reasons, and so on. So I would say I'm always playing in between this line of having sort of control, which is this is what I control, but then again trying to open the project and to be as generous as possible in the way that also you sort of understanding the process of creating these works and then installing the works and then exhibiting these works as moments of exchange between different people and between people who necessarily are not really interested maybe or don't have a relationship to art, because museums now have become also tourist attractions. People take selfies, but people who are really interested in art, it's maybe a fraction of that larger group. But then you have people who would even basically never go to a museum, or they know, or it's not part of their routine, not even like monthly, or maybe like, for example, the project I did for Sao Paulo for the Biennale. One of the teams that I work with, this younger couple, of course, they've been to the Biennale before. They know the history of the Biennale, but the embroiderers, this woman, it was a cooperative of embroiderers from a more a working class neighborhood in the outskirts of Sao Paulo, like an hour away, and they had no relationship to the Biennale, which has been there since the 50s. They've never been there before. So also these projects also become moments of opening up or sort of creating a bridge between different communities that are not very or not involved at all, or don't have a history with art, or simply not an interest, or because it's not part of their daily survival, and so in this sense the drawings are sort of the unifying element, but then I'm open to losing control, like you said before, but because in this loss of control I also gain other things, and this is what I'm interested in.
I have a question for Felipe, and that is, how did you land in as the fabrics and flags and stitching? I can guess why you have landed there and have continued to work with it. But what's your reason? Tell the story of how you ended up with that.
With the fabrics?
Fabrics and the flag and stitching and everything.
Yeah, because basically, well, like specifically the working with textiles, it started in 2006. And before that, I was exploring different materials. I've always worked with abstraction, but mostly on the walls. I was doing this, like in art school, I will do these mural installations with first, because I studied printmaking. So I will print with silkscreen, these sort of monochrome surfaces, black monochrome with a little bit of, blue, like a little bit. I was very, in that time, inspired or sort of touched by Ad Reinhardt. Not only in the use of non-color or sort of almost color, but also with this idea of imposing rules on how you work. like restricting yourself as much as possible to gain the most, or to gain what you're interested in, or to just explore. And but then I started, after that, silk screens on the wall that were first, I will print them on self-adhesive plastic, and then I started working directly with adhesive plastic. And then I work with wood, with paint on wood, with acrylic on wood, and just exploring different materials. And I think now we go back to my nomadic life and having moved to New York, and being New York also a very expensive city. I didn't have, I worked many years at home, and in the 20-something years I lived in New York, I only had studio for 3 years. And it was a practical decision, but at the end I also realized that it's a sort of a political decision, because I wasn't interested in having a big storage or having crates, or like, for me all this material just accumulates, and I wanted to work in a more reduced, or more sort of minimal or more efficient way. And for me, fabric and textiles have this enormous efficiency. You can fold it, you can put it in a suitcase, and in a suitcase I can carry 8 of these, and then this uses a huge amount of space. So when I discovered textile, just to go like into the like fine details, it was for an exhibition I was doing in Santiago in Chile. And I was also exploring with video at the time. I was fascinated in New York because I've also always been interested in music. I was recording the subway musicians, and I was making this sort of video piece with musicians. And I had this show in Chile, and I was again experimenting with video, and I needed to make the space a little bit darker because it was a big garage and it was summer. But instead of installing a black curtain, which I felt was a little bit too standard, and I also realized, I also knew I'm not a video artist, and that's like the first gesture of video artist, to make the space dark, to put a black curtain, to paint the walls black. And I wanted to go against this, so I decided to do a colorful curtain, and I did, and that was the first sort of abstract curtain that I made, and it had a very practical reason to exist. And then I realized, wow, this curtain is moving with the wind, it interacts with space, I can divide space. So I realized that it had a lot of potential, and also it's transportable, it's relatively cheap to produce. You can also make it at home, you just need a sewing machine. And this is how it developed, and this is how it grew. And I realized later that, I'm happy to work this way, because I don't need a huge storage, and I think that's basically it.
It's a beautiful story. You made what I would call a secondary or a tri-area decision that involved the support system for your work,
Mhm.
and it turned out to be your work. This is beautiful. This is the beautiful thing that happens. You're also very smart. I have if I were to turn the camera around, you would see what happens if you don't take that approach to making art. It's a nightmare.
Julia is asking if you could perhaps talk a bit more about the kind of the historical origins of the abstraction that you're referring to.
Yes.
I think in both of your practices, it's an important part.
Well, in my case, I think the answer, there's 2 answers. One is, I think she's asking for the patchwork pieces. So in relation to that, the Mikosuke people, they was also part of another tribe called the Seminole. And at one point they split because of differences. The Seminole wanted to stay more in the central-northern part of Florida, and the Mikosuke, and basically the Seminole sort of incorporated agriculture and sort of like Western ways of understanding the land and using the land. And the Mikosuke were more, they wanted to live in a more traditional way, which were hunters and gatherers. So that's why they moved more south, and they established themselves in the Everglades. And but they both share the same sort of history with patchwork, which is basically just an understanding of nature and an interpretation of nature and the elements, but it's also related to a specific history that, and there's always a conversation with Western society, with colonization, and in this case, the Mikosuke women were introduced to the sewing machine through the wife of a pastor, and because they were also and this is also before they were recognized as a Native American tribe by the federal government, which happened very late, like in the late 60s. And that's also another very weird story that I can tell later, maybe if there's time, how they managed to get that. They actually went to Cuba and they asked for a meeting with Fidel Castro, and this is in the early days of the Cuban Revolution. And they took, because the federal government wouldn't recognize them. So they said, okay, so we have to pressure, and this is when the early days of the Cuban Revolution, and a group of Mikosuke leaders, inspired by the idea of another Native American activist, who now I forgot his name, sorry, but they decided to go to Cuba and and they took a photographer from the Miami Herald or something, and then the federal government saw this and they started freaking out, and then this is how finally they managed to get their status as recognized by the federal government. But anyway, basically the way I see it is that through the use of the sewing machine, because before they were recognized and before they had their land sort of the autonomous land where they will sort of live as an autonomous entity, they were placed in these reservations, and it was pretty terrible because these places became tourist attractions. So tourists from all over the states will go and visit them, and you will have the artisans working there selling their products, and a little bit like a human zoo, sadly. And this has happened in the whole history of colonization. It happened in South America, Latin America. People from Chile were sent to Germany, and they were exhibited in zoos. And so this history of colonization is pretty harsh, of course, brutal, but within this sort of struggle, these women realized that they could learn how to use the sewing machine and produce these patchworks, and the exact step of how they came with this idea of abstracting animals or elements like fire, storm, etc. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but the technical part of it, which is the sewing machine, they saw the potential of this. They saw the potential of creating these patchworks and incorporating into clothing, and also to be able to use all these sort of more bright colors and so on with new fabrics that were being imported or produced even in the States, and it was a way to also to make a living. So they will sell their clothing and so on in these reservations.
So there's like a connection also perhaps to American quilting.
Yeah, of course. And American quilting too is another history that I'm interested in, and I've been researching a little bit. I did a project in 2022 or 3, recently 23, I think. Yeah, after PAM, I did a quilting project in upstate New York with a quilter. And the quilting history in the States is also it's very racially divided. You have sort of the white quilt history, then you have the African American quilt, which is very different too. It's made it's much more organic and sort of improvised, it also comes from the context of poverty. They will work with scraps of fabric, and had to recycle a lot of fabric. The more wealthy white communities had more access to fabric, and they could, we will do these square designs and cut it in triangles and so on, and then you have the Native American quilting history, and I'm not sure why. I mean, I'm not sure how they relate, but I understand that they are viewed and sort of understood as different histories when they all share the same sort of techniques and in even styles. And then there's another part of that question which I think relates more to my background, which is coming from Chile. we have also indigenous textiles, as I mentioned before, and also use of abstraction. And you see this in pre-Columbian textiles that have, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years, and luckily a lot of these textiles were very well preserved specifically in the north of Chile and in Peru, and because of the desert, because of the dry weather and the dryness of the climate, but also because of the kind of fiber they use, because they took the fiber out of the llamas and which come from the camel family. So it's animals that during the day it's very hot and at night it's very cold. So they have a short fur, but very rich in oil and very rich in this greasy material. So this is also something that helps preserve these fabrics. So there's a long history of abstraction, of the use of abstraction in textiles also in Latin America, in Mexico too, in Guatemala. So I'm interested in those histories and how those histories could be, it's not my intention to reinterpret them at all. It's just if there's an intention, the intention is to, study them, understand them, and share this knowledge, and share this knowledge through the work, which is also something that happened in the exhibition at PAM, which was very beautiful because the Mikosuke community and the Seminole community, they were so happy with this project. And it happens sometimes that within the art world and with people are very afraid to collaborate with, for example, an indigenous community, because there's this whole situation of exploitation too, of cultural appropriation. But of course, my intention is not to appropriate anything, but to collaborate and to make something together and I see it this way, then this is basically, I think every project that I do is that the end result is something that I wouldn't have done by my own, and the other person or the other group also wouldn't have done by their own. So it's sort of a marriage of interest, a marriage of experiences, a marriage of aesthetic decisions, of choices.
And came of this exhibition of collaboration. Yeah.
Yes, and the Mikosuke community here was super proud. It was the first time that their culture was exhibited in this scale in a museum in Florida, or at least in Miami. So that they were very, very happy with this experience. And I'm still in contact with Khadija, with other people, members from the community, and that was a beautiful experience. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, that's okay. And for you, Clay, you think there is, I think a lot of your pieces are not necessarily, they don't fall into geometric abstraction per se, but there is an inherent kind of, compositional affinity to abstraction in all of your work.
Yeah. I cannot. I grew up appreciating at a fairly early age, appreciating large scale abstract expressionist artworks. I can remember the first time or times I witnessed abstract expressionism. I think perhaps, or large painting, let's call it. I think perhaps it was, it could have been Morris Lewis or something. I was taken by the scale, and then years later, after my art education, I became more and more interested in the dilemma of painting. I think that first of all, applying paint to a canvas or linen is it's the technique and the language of depiction. It's the process of depicting something that was carried over to abstract expressionist language. but it was with the same materials. And I've always been fascinated by how, even today, I mean, there's just a massive amount of artists that still paint on fabric. You know, it's interesting. We're talking with Felipe, and now we're back into the fabric thing. I mean, it is fabric, and people are coating it with all kinds of materials, including paint, to get it something else. And when I started trying to get that something else, I automatically just imagined doing it in a different way. It never dawned. I just don't like painting on a stretched canvas. Is like a really icky feeling for me. And but I did want to create things. I never wanted to mimic abstract painting. I wanted to make abstract painting, but I didn't want to paint necessarily, and I didn't want to paint on fabric. And so I started finding situations in the world around me that I thought could be used to do what I wanted to do. But the scale, I standing in front of an artwork which is much larger than I am is still a turn on for me. I remember. I'll get back to this memory. I was at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, Connecticut, with my father, and in the same museum installation, I saw I think it was a Morris Louis painting, and I saw a Chamberlain sculpture, an early Chamberlain automobile sculpture, and so these two things hit me. One, I'm talking about, I mean, I was like 10. One, a painting could be larger than me, and a sculpture could be, in both cases, the art could be from the world around me and another happening than making art or depicting something. Okay, I mean, not the only one in my generation that doesn't want to depict something using art, but I also think that the abstract expressionists, they approached a physicality using painting, right? And so they were on the cusp. They were on the cusp, but they were on their way to this physicality. And what's magic about it is it doesn't become sculpture. They don't leave the canvas. They don't leave the practice of painting, but they take it to the point where they either cross over to another physicality, or they stay where they are and just work it. And that was my favorite field in art for a long time. But I couldn't do what they were doing. I had to find my own language, and that was the language of an entirely different set of materials. But I can't lie. I even feel a sense of, what would you call it? Heritage, in a sense, when it comes to large scale physical images.
Like here.
Like there.
Very good. I think we've pretty much exhausted everyone's attention.
Yeah, we could keep for another hour, but people, there's not going to be
There won't be anybody here.
But thank you so much for taking the time today. And just to reiterate, there is more material on both on our website. Both Felipe and Clay have their own websites, which are really kind of very broad and in-depth resources that I would strongly recommend. The show here continues for another 2 weeks until the 21st of October. And I hope you all get a chance to see the exhibition. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicholas. And thank you, Daniela, and thank you, everybody. And
See you soon.
the next time.
To the next time.
Bye. Thank you.